Hi scholars, happy Wednesday. We are going to be reading Chapter 5 in our readers, Unit 8, Rainforest, Rivers, and Oceans. If you don't have your reader, go to the video description below. You'll find our link there. I'm going to be reading through and talking you through some of the context and then also touching base a little bit on our Edulastic assessment tomorrow. So looking a little bit first at our big question for the day. Prior to the arrival of Europeans, how did the habitat of the Pacific Northwest influence the culture of local Native American tribes? So before the Spanish, before Europeans showed up at all, how were these tribes changing? What impacted their lives and make them the way that they were? So it's things like what resources did the Pacific Northwest have available? The Pacific Northwest is on the western half of our country and the northwestern corner. Think of states like Washington near the border of Canada, and then the very tip of California, far north. What kind of resources or supplies did they have there? How did that change them? How were whales an important asset to the Makala, the Maka? This is a Native American tribe. How were whales, the animal from the ocean, important to them? Our daily objective, I can describe how the habitat influences daily life and culture of Native Americans using transition words and phrases. Towards the end, we're going to talk about transition words a little bit and phrases and use these transition words to talk about how their lives changed. Some vocabulary you're going to see in Chapter 5 today. Harpoons, it's a large spear used to hunt large fish. Supplement, to add or to contribute another section or part to make something else complete. So it's like adding on. Think of in class when we use like our adding on hand signal. You want to supplement or add on or contribute to another scholar's answer to make it more complete. Tanning is a verb, the special process of changing animal skin into leather. So if you were to skin a deer or skin a cow, that's not immediately leather. You have to do a chemical change to that skin to change it into leather. Identity is the characteristics that makes a person or group different from other people or groups. So what about your identity makes you unique? So how is this tribe different than that tribe? What are their identities? We're looking for what makes them distinct. An adjective being different in a noticeable way. So there's something distinct about everyone's identity that makes them different and unique. I'm going to be reading Chapter 5 alongside of you. We're going to be starting at the very first two pages, pages 42 and 43, reading our introduction and reading Fishing for Salmon. If you've never had salmon before, I highly recommend it. It's a delicious fish. We had some great salmon at my wedding. I still think about it to this day. The top of page 42. What do you imagine when you think of a rainforest? Perhaps you imagine a hot, humid place with heavy vegetation and trees filled with exotic parrots and monkeys. You might also imagine snakes and all sorts of bugs. It is true that most rainforests are steamy jungles located in tropical regions of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. However, not all rainforests are in the tropics. Some rainforests grow in the temperate zone, where the weather is neither too hot or too cold, but is often very wet. The Pacific Northwest, including much of the Washington state and Oregon, plus the western flank of Canada, called British Columbia. Temperate rainforests blanket the coastal parts of this region, so this is the parts right next to the Pacific Ocean. The steady rain and mild temperatures are perfect for plant growth. Spruce, hemlock, and fir trees can reach heights of 300 feet or more. Beneath the dense treetop canopy, the forest floor is a carpet of thick moss, fluffy ferns, and lichens. The climate is good for animal life too. There are hundreds of different birds and fish species. There are over 140 mammals, including some very large elk, bighorn sheep, mountain lions, gray wolves, and the occasional grizzly bear. So there's a perfectly diverse habitat for these animals. If you've never been to the Northwest, I've only been there once. I love it. It's very rainy. There's a lot of nature and trees out there. I'm someone who loves like the rain and like dreary days, so it's very nice for me. It's perfect coffee drinking weather, if I might say. Going to be talking about one of my favorite foods, fishing for salmon. The Pacific Northwest is also a good habitat for humans. By some estimates, Native Americans have lived there for as much as 500 generations, or 1,500 years, 15,000 years. The area was once home to at least 30 tribes. hundreds of villages, and a huge variety of languages, customs, and beliefs. All the tribes had a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but they did not need to move around in order to find food. They lived in large, permanent villages. They did not need to farm either. Everything they needed was readily available in the forest and waters. As long as they respected these resources, then there was always enough to go around. In fact, there was usually more than enough for everyone, so they weren't even having to stress about having enough supplies. A very important food source for most tribes was salmon. They could always depend on salmon to swim up the river every year. One important thing to know about salmon is that they are born in rivers, but they live most of their life at sea. When they are adults, they return from the sea and swim back up to the rivers to the very place they were born. There they lay their eggs and die. The eggs hatch, the baby salmon find their way to the sea, and the cycle continues. So the salmon is born in a river, goes down the river to the ocean, and when it's ready to die or ready to give birth to these eggs, it goes back up the river, jumping the entire way, and then it lays the eggs. That's a very popular time for people to go salmon fishing or hunting, is when the salmon come back up the river because they're jumping the entire time. They're fighting against the current. The other important thing to know about salmon is that they're very nutritious. The people of the Pacific Northwest certainly knew this, and they became master fishermen. Some tribes fished using baskets, nets, spears, or harpoons, and a large variety of ingenious traps to catch salmon. A harpoon, you can see the photo right there. A harpoon is like a spear, but it can actually go out and retract. So a harpoon now, a modern one, would have like a piston inside of it. It would shoot out with a rope or a line attached to it so you can like pull it back in automatically. Back then they would probably use rope or they would tie it to it. So you would use it to attach to like a fish or a large animal in the ocean. It would like attach out and it kind of becomes a fishing pole where you can pull back and retract it. It's a way to keep the spear inside of them and add some length. The very bottom. However, salmon are only available to catch in the river for a few months each year when they return to lay their eggs, so it's a small window of time. For the remainder of the year, they are in the ocean. Therefore, if you depend on salmon for food, you'll have to supplement your diet. Supplement means to add on to completion, so you'll need to add other things. You can't just eat salmon because they're only around a small part of the year. Native American men in this region hunted the big mammals that roamed the rainforest. Women gathered roots, berries, and grains, including wild rice. Many tribes went after other types of fish, as well as whales and seals, the mammals of the sea. On page 44 and 45, we're looking at whale hunters. We're going to be talking about a specific tribe that hunted whales primarily and how they went about this task. The top of 44. One tribe, the Makah, were famous whalers. They used long, fast canoes to chase whales in the rough Pacific waters, and they killed them with long, sharp harpoons. This is how they hunted huge gray whales and humpbacks, which can weigh up to 80,000 pounds, about the same as 4 school buses. Imagine hunting a creature that size from the front of a canoe with a harpoon. These aren't even nice, like very sturdy canoes or harpoons. Remember, they're using what resources are on hand, so they're not using a bunch of like metal or steel. It's mostly wood and sharp rocks. This is very dangerous work, but worth the risk, because one whale could feed an entire village for months. So I want you to think back to Island of the Blue Dolphin. Our main character was a part of a Native American tribe that lived on an island off the coast of California. At one point, she talks about hunting a whale. A bunch of men from her tribe would have to go out in canoes, hunt it together, and then drag it back. But it was worth the risk as it could feed this entire island for a long time. So when she's on the island by herself, it's not a task she can really do. So I want you to keep using Island of the Blue Dolphin as a comparison and think about how she hunted and prepared compared to what they're doing now. Because they're both hunting in the Pacific Northwest as a Native American tribe. So there's a lot of similarities. After they killed a whale, the hunters towed it to the shore and the whole village would come out to help cut up the meat, salt it, and hang it up to dry. This preserved the meat for later use. Just as Plains tribes used all parts of the buffalo, Pacific Coast tribes used the whole whale. They took oil from the whale blubber to use for cooking, tanning hides, or covering wounds and bug bites. Whale oil was also valuable in trade to inland tribes. Bones were used to make scrapers, fish hooks, and other tools, so they used all parts of this whale. For example, that oil would come out of the fat. They would get this oil secretion, and that was used for turning leather, turning this like hide of like an animal, like a cow or a deer, into leather by soaking it in this oil till it gets hard and rough, and you can use it to like protect yourself or make clothing out of. Look at the photo as well. That's an actual photo from 1930. It was a Maka tribe hunting a whale, bringing it up. Look how big it is, and look how many people were there to bring it in the first place. It weighs so much, you have to have all these people just to drag it up in the first place and carve it up. Next up, we're going to be looking at the power of the totem and clans and the potlatch. We're going to start with power of the totem first at the top of 46. This is probably a familiar looking icon. You've probably seen totems before, especially if you've even driven around Ohio. There's some camps, summer camps, things like that. We're going to look at the history and the significance that it had for these tribes. Like other Native Americans, the people of the Pacific Northwest did not take anything for granted. After they hunted any animal, whether it was a salmon, whale, elk, or anything else, they always welcomed its spirit into their village and thanked it for helping them. People feel a direct connection to other living things, and they express this connection through their religion. So in their religion, they believed everything had a soul or a spirit, and they prayed and respected it because that thing gave them life. Sure, it may just be a fish, but that fish fed their village and kept their friends and family alive, so they gave it respect. Tribes of the Pacific Northwest practiced a form of religion called totemism. They believed the spirits shared special bonds. They believed that people shared special bonds with animals, although their spirits were connected, which would make sense. They're connected in terms of giving life to one another. Each family had a bond with a specific animal spirit. This animal was the family's totem. In many tribes, totems were displayed on colorful artistic wood carvings. Some people placed a tall totem tower outside of a family's home. Others passed a sacred mask down from generation to generation. So if you look at that totem pole on the left, you can recognize some animals. Like you can see maybe a mask. You can see some birds. Looks like a snake there on the bottom. You can see the connections and then how each family had a specific totem that represented them, and they would stack them all up to show. The totems were not simply for decoration. They were symbols of something far more significant than a fancy wood carving. A totem was the key to a family's identity. Just as every family had its own unique traits, so too did a totem have unique meanings for the family. Some totems were big, fierce animals, like the bear, wolf, or eagle. Others were gentler animals, like the beaver or seal. The size or strength of the animal was not as important as the stories and characteristics of the animal. For example, beavers were symbols of determination, wolves were symbols of loyalty, whales represented wisdom, and spiders represented creativity. So, if whatever animal your family had represented for it would usually be something to comment on their personality or traits they valued. In some tribes, a family could not hunt, eat, or otherwise harm its totem animal. It would be sacred to them. Not all totems were animals, however. Some family totems were related to other parts of nature, like the river, the wind, or the sun and moon. Think about all those things are important. The river provides them with water, provides them with fish. The wind grows their crops, spreads the seeds of more plants. The sun gives them warmth. It gives them the ability to grow and lets them farm. And then the moon is a sacred beast as well, sacred thing as well. Some totems included mythical creatures and monsters, like the powerful thunderbird or the two-headed sea serpent. Each symbol and the stories related to it were passed from generation to generation, so they carried special meaning for the family. We're going to talk about some of their mythology later, so we'll talk about that thunderbird or that sea serpent. For clans and a potlatch, the social structure of Pacific Northwest tribes were centered around large extended families called clans. Clans lived in spacious homes called plank houses, long narrow buildings made of cedar planks. As many as 50 or more people could live in one plank house. So if you look at the bottom, you see an illustration. A single plank house could fit as many as 50 people. It looks like a really, really large house. It looks maybe about like twice as large as a typical house because they were fitting as many families in it as possible. It's not like everyone would have their own room. A single tribe or village had many clans, and although they all worked together and shared their resources, some clans were much more wealthier than others. The head of a clan was a chieftain, and the wealthiest chieftains were often very powerful. Most importantly, they had the power to decide who was allowed to hunt, fish, or gather food in certain places. So if you were the chieftain, you would delegate certain tasks to different clans or families. Say, this clan or this family, since they're very powerful and I respect them, they're allowed to have these really nice hunting spots or this great part of the river. And then maybe some other would be stuck in these less powerful roles, wouldn't get as nearly the same amount of privilege. So if you were the head of a tribe, you had a lot of power to decide what everyone else did. Picking up from the top of page 48, we're going to talk a little bit about potlatch and what a potlatch is. Perhaps the most distinct and interesting tradition among tribes of the Pacific Northwest was the potlatch ceremony. A potlatch was basically a huge party. Every tribe had different rituals and rules about how to celebrate a potlatch, but they all had the same basic purpose: to display someone's wealth. Only the richest chieftains hosted potlatches, often to celebrate or mark a birth, death, marriage, or other important event within the clan. Wealthy potlatches had special plank houses specifically built just for potlatches. The richer the host, the bigger the potlatch. Sometimes they invited the whole village, along with chieftains from wealthy clans and other villages. A potlatch could last for days or even several weeks, depending on the host's wealth and tribal customs. These are lavish feasts, storytelling, and speeches, and lots of singing and dancing. Potlatches also involved important, secretive religious ceremonies. However, gift giving was always the main feature. In fact, the word potlatch means giving, and this is the unique thing that separates a potlatch from other Native American ceremonies. The potlatch host did not give gifts just because he was kind and generous. No, the gifts were a display or expression of his power and wealth. Gifts included blankets, animal hides, and shiny copper ornaments. Ordinarily, the host did not give food as gifts, although they did supply food for the feasts. Wealth among the people of the Pacific Northwest was not often measured by how much someone owned, but by how much they could give away to others. Chieftains also used potlatches to award ranks or seats to their friends and family members. That's how people in the tribe climbed up the social ladder. The closer a person's seat was to the chieftain, the more power and privilege that person had within the tribe. So, this all may actually sound pretty familiar to you. A potlatch sounds like the word a potluck. A potluck, if you've ever been to, is like a party where everyone brings a little bit of food or a gift, and then by everyone bringing a little bit of something, it compiles into a big party for everyone. Potlatch was a little bit different. It was the chieftain providing everything, and they measured his wealth by saying, hey, look how powerful that person is. He's giving everyone a little bit of something. Comparatively, now when you think of a rich person, it's how much they can keep for themselves. So they valued generosity and sharing in their powerful leaders comparatively to hoarding it all for oneself. On page 50 for European contact, I want you to jump straight to the bottom where it says European contact, the header. We're going to skip that first top paragraph for now. Starting on European contact. With European contact, tribes of the Pacific Northwest suffered many of the same troubles as tribes in other regions. Disease and warfare spread quickly, and by the mid-1800s, the population was greatly reduced. Tribes lost access to the traditional fishing and hunting grounds as miners, loggers, and other settlers moved into the region. One after one, the tribes were forced into small reservations or their numbers dwindled. We know this from Monday when we talked about settlers and missionaries. We know that they brought these diseases, they brought conflict and attacks. For many years, potlatches were outlawed by the U.S. government. They did not understand why the Native Americans destroyed such valuable resources. Sometimes the potlatch hosts even melted and destroyed copper coins they earned through trade with the settlers. Another part of a potlatch tradition is that they would burn the gifts to kind of symbolize the need or the desire. It was a way of giving thanks to spirits and to those that created all this for you in the first place. They're so wealthy they won't need it. In many cases, Native Americans were also forbidden from displaying their sacred totems because settlers believed they were connected to some kind of witchcraft. So these totem poles really weren't anything bad. They just showed like, hey, here's what we're giving thanks to, here's what represents our family. But the settlers and these people coming in and the U.S. government thought, no, this is some kind of witchcraft. You're going to use this as like a way to attack us or for magic. So they did not believe they should have them. To the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, the potlatch and totem were the heart of their culture and identity. Without them, their people lost their connection to the past, and they struggled to understand their own purpose or place in the world. Imagine everything in the world is already changing so fast, and you're being denied these things that who you are. It's everything to who you believe in. So if you're a religious person, imagine you have to move to a brand new place where you don't know anyone, and they take away your religious text, and there's things that give you peace and comfort. Despite this, many tribes in the Pacific Northwest held on to their tradition. They still pass totems from one generation to the next. They still share their ancient myth and stories about ancestors and animal spirits. And in some places, they still host potlatches to celebrate the great events in life and all the gifts of nature. So, we now understand and see how these tribes came into conflict with the Europeans and how this contact really hurt them. We've talked about that subject to death. We've seen all the ways that these new settlers and the U.S. government has hurt these tribes. Before we move on, or rather before we are done for the day, we have one last portion I want you to look at. For your word work, it's on page 85 of your packet. It looks like this. We've talked about transition words earlier on the year. This is some practice to review some of our concepts. We have words like after, however, most importantly, for many years, like, and despite this. So I would like you to rewrite, or not rather rewrite, but apply what transition word goes in what sentence. You have 6 of them. So remember, something like after means you're showing time and effect. So you wouldn't use it in something like number 1 where it says after potlatches were outlawed by the US government. You would use something else. After would show cause and effect, before and then after. I'm going to put up a reminder video tomorrow as well. But do not forget, we're going to sign on to Edulastic Thursday and complete the Navajo Codebreakers assignment. There's going to be an article and then some short answer questions. And then lastly, make sure that you are collecting your final packet this week. So we had one on Tuesday from 10 to 12:30. Hopefully you managed to get in then. Today, Thursday, or rather, sorry, tomorrow, Thursday, from 10:30 to 12:30. Any scholar, IEP, general, you can come in and pick up your new packet. If you're still having trouble getting it, make sure you reach out to an advisor. I believe on Saturday there's going to be a chance to come in as well, but we could figure out some delivery as well. I've already stopped by a few scholars' houses to drop it off. I would have no problem coming around this time as well. In the meantime, I'll see you tomorrow in the expectation video for our assignment, but make sure you reach out with any questions or concerns, and everyone stay safe. Have a good day.